Here's what's coming up on the world today. New York and Washington, D.C. brace for possible indictment of former U.S. President Donald Trump. Last Sri Lankan president says his country is no longer a bankrupt nation. IMF bailout talks. To other stories now, officials in New York and Washington, D.C. are preparing for potential protest as a grand jury impaneled as part of the investigation into Mr. Donald Trump's alleged role in a scheme to pay hush money to adult film star Stormy Daniels continues to weigh possible charges. Former U.S. President Donald Trump said he expects to be arrested today or tomorrow and called on his supporters to protest. Mr. Trump, whose supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, in a failed effort to overturn his election defeat, wrote, "Protest, take our nation back." The probe comes at a critical time as Mr. Trump seeks the Republican nomination for the presidency come 2024. No U.S. president has faced criminal charges while in office or even afterwards. However, Mr. Trump has said that he will continue campaigning even if he is charged with a crime. Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said that any possible protest in support of former President Donald Trump should be peaceful. On social media, Mr. Trump asked his followers to protest what he says was his looming arrest.
The president has been very clear when it comes to Americans who want to protest. They should do it peacefully, and that is something that is incredibly important that the president has always continued to say, but I don't want to get into hypotheticals from here, and so I'll just leave it there. We are always prepared. I can say that from here. I'm just not going to get into hypotheticals or any potential scenarios, but we are always prepared.
Well, as expected, this has sparked mixed reactions among Trump's supporters and critics across the country. Some loyal fans voiced their support for him outside his Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach, Florida, and dismissed the possible charges as politically motivated. Meanwhile, on the streets of Washington, opinions were divided. While some people were saying that they were looking forward to seeing justice being done, others said they did not expect things to change much if Mr. Trump gets indicted.
Again, they've tried impeachment, they've tried Russian hoax, they tried lying. Every day they try to pick this man apart. And what have they come up with so far? Zero. That's what they've come up with so far. They're just going to keep going. All they want to do is take the man down. This man who does not deserve this. All he cares about is us, the people.
This is just beyond ridiculous at this point. I mean, you could keep going after him and the outcome's all going to be the same. And it's only going to incite more people to come out and support. Okay? And that's what it's about, is the more people we have to show everybody, doesn't matter, we're still going to support him, and he's going to run, and he's going to win.
I think it's terrible. It's been going on since he began. 2016, didn't they start some of this stuff in 2016? I can't remember the exact date, but I've been going to rowdy since January 2016. It seems like it's horrendous. Our Constitution is just blown to bits.
Yeah, it seems like if he does get indicted, I don't think that's going to really change too much. I think it'll probably charge and probably amplify his base, given that he's running. Otherwise, I don't think it'll change too much, to be honest.
Meanwhile, as the U.S. braces for a possible indictment of Mr. Trump, one political analyst said the case could trigger sympathy and even increase popular support for the former president. Claremont McKenna, assistant visiting professor of governance, says that Mr. Trump is indicted. If Mr. Trump is indicted over an alleged hush money payment during his 2016 campaign, then his supporters are likely to feel that the case is politically motivated.
But just as a political matter, I do think it will surely help him. It will raise his... He has an extraordinary ability to make true the saying that all press is good press. He has a way to use, he sucks all the oxygen and can always turn, if the camera is on him, he will turn it to his advantage. the danger with the indictment, whether or not it's a strategy, is that even among people who are not part of that hardcore base, it could trigger sympathy for him. And in America, we tend to hate our political opponents more than we love our own team. So I think there are many Republicans who are not necessarily part of that hardcore base, but who still have some, the former president has some appeal for them. Those people who might have been embarrassed by January 6th, who might have been disappointed by the last election in which the president was really an anchor for their side, might rekindle their affection for Trump if they think he's the subject of a kind of politicized indictment. Trying to steal an election, trying to get election officials to lie or find votes, that's something most Americans can instantly understand as a problem. The kind of arcana that this case involves, and it seems to all tie back to him trying to cover up cheating on his wife, I just think most Americans, it's a big shrug. In fact, they're almost allergic to, the state getting involved in that sort of activity. We already see that some of the Republican leadership who clearly don't like him and would like him kind of off stage at this point now feel compelled to defend him against the indictment. And a very similar phenomenon, I think, is going to emerge or is emerging among voters. When the Republicans went after Clinton, a quarter century ago, over a sex scandal, essentially, and sort of arcane points of law related to testifying about that relationship, they really lost the public, and it really backfired on them. And the fact that this is not one of the cases related to the election or even the documents, mishandling of national documents, but to arcane campaign finance law violations related to trying to hush up marital infidelity, seems to be one of the weakest ways to attack Trump, and probably with even beyond his own base of support. We saw 25 years ago, Americans didn't find it very compelling when the Republicans tried it, a similar kind of thing against Clinton, backfired. So there's a lot of potential, I think, for something like this to do the same thing today, to really backfire on Democrats.
Well, to find out more on this, our Washington correspondent Maria Bird joins me now for more. Hello, Maria. It's good to see you.
See you.
Now, this is the first time in the history of America that a former president is being charged with a crime. Speak to us about this indictment.
This indictment is unprecedented. I think that it was anticipated, and we can look at the January 6th hearings and everything that led up to this moment in time, that it was anticipated that he would be potentially indicted, and we could see for the first time in American history a president being arrested. And so this is much bigger than just, I think, the Stormy Daniels hush money. Yes, this is a specific indictment right now, but there are a lot of other charges, I think, that the New York state has been looking at, the federal government has been looking at, the U.S. The DOD, Department of Defense in the U.S. has been looking at, to really see what the president's role was in various acts that have been assumed to have been breaking the law. And so I think this is going to be the beginning of what we'll begin to see around his taxes, around the January 6th attacks, whether he incited that, and obviously whether or not he broke campaign finance laws with the hush money to Stormy Daniels.
But Maria, do you see any possibility that Mr. Trump will be arrested by either states or federal agents, or would even be taken to court?
It looks like at this time he's very confident that he could be arrested. We've seen, obviously, the metal fences going around the Capitol. We've seen an elevated number of police officers and military personnel on the streets of Washington in case there is a protest, which would lend you to believe that there is a high likelihood that he could be arrested if he does not turn himself in or he does not go before the New York State and let them know that he is willing to be interviewed, to go before for a hearing. So if he does that voluntarily, we will not see an arrest occur. But what we're seeing right now, there could be enough charges that the New York State is going to bring forth that we could see a historic moment.
Now, wouldn't this be seen as a political circus? I mean, some people would expect, as you said earlier, that Mr. Trump would voluntarily appear and even testify himself, or he could be extradited. What do you see this as?
It doesn't sound like he's interested in voluntarily testifying on his own. He has said that if he is arrested, he's encouraged his supporters to protest. And what this is reminding many Americans of is what has been claimed by the January 6th hearings is that he incited the riots on the Capitol. And I think that what we're seeing and what we're hearing now is what many will believe. If there are unruly protests or any type of violent acts that occur, that they're going to tie it to his announcement to say, if I'm arrested, please supporters protest.
Now, this indictment could actually open the door to further prosecutions. Do you think that this will even prevent Mr. Trump from running for office in 2024?
There's going to be a lot of constitutional law evaluated on this. They're going to be reviewing the Constitution to see what is legally possible. I don't think he's going to stop. Yes, he'll probably run and state that he's going to campaign for 2024. But when it comes down to the actual election processing, I think they're going to have to look at the Constitution to see, are there any laws that would prohibit him if he is charged? Now, the question is it just a charge or will he actually be convicted of a crime? And that's going to be the difference, is that if they're able to get through a judicial process quickly before the election cycle hits, then potentially you could see that he will not be eligible if he's convicted of a crime. But if he's just charged, they'll have to look at the Constitution very clearly and review each line of that to see if he is still eligible to run. You also must remember there are two very viable Republican candidates as well that have already said they are running for office. So the Republican Party with this, even though many people believe that former President Trump media is his area of expertise, he knows how to use good and bad media, I think that because he does have two other candidates running, this could potentially hurt his campaign moving forward.
Well, reactions are expected in cases like this. How are citizens reacting to this latest development?
I think citizens are, especially the Republican Party, I think the Republican Party is struggling with this because you're seeing a very divided Republican Party, which we've seen now since 2016. And so this is really hurting that party because they are trying to have a clear voice, a clear direction, but this is creating additional challenge for the party. I think the Democrats are sitting back and watching and hoping that this allows for the Democratic Party, specifically President Biden, to put some things in place that secures the Democrat being in office during the next election cycle. So I think that for Democrats, they're using this as a way to potentially plow forward and stay focused on the agenda of the Democratic Party, and Republicans are a bit more challenged at this time.
All right. Thank you very much, Maria Bird, our Washington correspondent. Thanks a lot for your time. Over in Sri Lanka now, where the President Ranil says the country was no longer a bankrupt nation after the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, approved a nearly $3 billion bailout for the crisis-hit economy. Supporters of the president set off fireworks in the streets of Colombo to celebrate the IMF's bailout approval as he told the country in a televised address that import restrictions will be gradually rolled back. Sri Lanka will get the first $330 million tranche of the bailout in the next 2 days, and that's according to the global lender, putting the onus on the cash-strapped nation to rein in its debts to sustainable levels. Economic management, coupled with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, has left Sri Lanka severely short of dollars for essential imports at the start of last year, tipping the island nation into its worst financial crisis in 7 decades. And in France, protesters set piles of debris on fire in central Paris after President Emmanuel Macron's government narrowly survived a no-confidence motion in parliament over a deeply unpopular pension reform. In some of Paris's most prestigious avenues, firefighters scrambled to put out burning waste piles, left uncollected for days due to the strikes as protesters played cat and mouse with the police. Police charged at protesters gathered on streets and even detained some of them. As midnight passed, protesters still gathered at the Palais La Bastille, and the future of the no-confidence vote will be a relief to Mr. Macron. Had it succeeded, it would have sunk his government and even killed the legislation, which is set to raise the retirement age by 2 years to 64. The United States and its allies have condemned North Korea's recent missile drills at the United Nations. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has overseen drills stimulating a nuclear counterattack against the United States and South Korea, and the warning to the allies who are scaling up their joint military exercises. The North's drills involved a short-range missile launch, but unusually the missile flew from buried silo, which analysts say that could help improve speed and stability in future tests of intercontinental ballistic missiles.
This growing crisis threatens not only the region, but global peace and stability. Each of these launches violate multiple Security Council resolutions. These unlawful launches jeopardize the safety of maritime and aviation travel and pose a clear threat to the global non-proliferation regime. We also demand that the DPRK comply with its obligations under numerous Security Council resolutions and abandon its unlawful weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible way. We remain committed to diplomacy, and to that end, the Security Council must overcome its prolonged silence and speak out against the DPRK's destabilizing violations. The DPRK is testing the Council's resolve and purpose, and the Council must act.
The DPRK announced that the ballistic missile, which it designated as Hwasong-17, flew a distance of 1,000 kilometers and to an altitude of 6,045 kilometers. The DPRK also launched a short-range ballistic missile on Sunday, local time. The DPRK characterized this launch as being part of a quote, drill simulating a nuclear counterattack, end quote. This was the fourth event in 11 days in which the DPRK carried out launches using ballistic missile technology.
North Korea has launched an ICBM towards us, which landed just 200 kilometers from Japan. North Korea also launched another ballistic missile on March 19th on local time.
Mr. President, the Republic of Korea condemns in the strongest possible terms the DPRK's continued ballistic missile launches, including its ICBM launch on March 16th and the subsequent ballistic missile launch on 19th local time, which clearly constitute flagrant violations of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. The DPRK launched the so-called Hwasong-17 ICBM just a few hours before my president's flight to Japan, which was a deliberate attempt to sabotage a critical milestone toward future-oriented Korea-Japan bilateral relations.
Our United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called on rich nations to accelerate the shift on the net zero emissions after a new assessment, which scientists warned there was little time to lose when it came to tackling climate change. In a recorded address, Mr. Guterres described the sixth synthesis report from the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as a survival guide for humanity and has asked developed countries to commit to net zero by the earlier date of around 2040.
It starts with parties immediately hitting the fast-forward button on their net zero deadlines to get to global net zero by 2050. in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in light of different national circumstances. Specifically, leaders of developed countries must commit to reaching net zero as close as possible to 2040, the limit they should all aim to respect. Humanity is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast. As today's report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, details, humans are responsible for virtually all global heating over the last 200 years. The rate of temperature rise in the last half-century is the highest in 2,000 years. Concentrations of carbon dioxide are at their highest in at least 2 million years. The climate time bomb is ticking. The 1.5-degree limit is achievable, but it will take a quantum leap in climate action. This report is a clarion call to massively fast-track climate efforts by every country and every sector and on every time frame. In short, our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once.
And finally on the program, away from the war and the crime and everything happening around the world, how does it feel to be the world's happiest country? Well, I guess Finland has the answer to that, as it once again tops the World Happiness Report, which was released yesterday, and measures social support, income, health, freedom, generosity, and the absence of corruption to determine a country's national happiness. Finland is topping the list for a 6th year in a row, followed by Denmark, Iceland, Israel, the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, Luxembourg, and of course New Zealand. According to that report, most populations around the world continue to remarkably and resiliently despite several crises such as COVID-19 pandemic, the global energy crisis, high inflation, and the war in Ukraine. More generally, it says that people are happier living in countries where the happiness gap is smaller. Lithuania is the only new country in the top 20, but war-torn Afghanistan and Lebanon remain the 2 unhappiest countries in the survey. The first World Happiness Report from the Sustainable Development Resolutions Network, which is a United Nations global initiative, was published in 2012.
It is a traditional Finnish crazy stuff. I think we all agree.
Yeah.
And it's really the happiness side.
Well, it's exciting to know happy places, and I guess it will be a nice place to visit. Well, that's it on The World Today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Anne Nwawadu. Please stay safe.